Good morning, afternoon, or evening to everyone joining us today. On behalf of USAID and ResilienceLinks, I welcome you to our Theme Month webinar on migration as a source of resilience. I'm Jamie Charles with ResilienceLinks. Before we begin, let me orient you to the Zoom platform. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see most of your controls. First, please use the chat to introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining us from. To ask questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A button. We are recording this webinar and will email you the post-event resources shortly following the event. You can also find the resources on ResilienceLinks.org. Next slide, please. Let's briefly look at today's agenda. Our host will start us off with some opening remarks and introductions, and then we'll hear from today's panel of speakers. After their presentations, we'll open up the floor to take questions from the audience and hear closing remarks from our host. Next slide, please. Thank you for your attendance, and I'll now pass it to this month's Theme Month host, Lori Ashley, Climate Adaptation and Resilience Advisor for USAID's Center for Resilience.
Thanks so much, Jamie, and thanks to folks who are starting to put their introduction in the chat. It'll be great to have an active chat today so we can hear as much from you all as possible. Thank you, Jamie, and thanks to the organizers of this event today, the Center for Resilience and the ResilienceLinks team for providing the platform for the webinar. Welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled to have the chance to host this event today. This is a topic I've been long awaiting the chance to talk with the resilience audience, such as yourselves. So before I introduce our excellent speakers, I just want to give a brief introduction as to why we at the Center for Resilience chose this topic of migration as a source of resilience. At USAID, we consider resilience to be the ability to protect and improve well-being despite shocks and stresses. And I know all of you are familiar with a range of resilience frameworks that often highlight things like the role of shocks and stresses, adaptive capacities, well-being outcomes, and more. And a key element of frameworks for resilience are those sources for resilience, those things that are going to allow people to maintain well-being in the face of shocks and stresses. The human capital, livelihoods, systems, relationships and networks, and more that people can access to strengthen resilience. So today, we're here to consider migration as a source of resilience and how migration links with a number of the other things that we consider important for resilience. So actually, here during the introduction, I'm going to put all of you on the spot anonymously with 2 poll questions. So if we can go to the next slide, we are going to start with poll question 1. On a scale of 0 to 3, how important do you think migration is for resilience? So 0 being not important, 3 being very important. So if you can take, we're going to take like 20 seconds here. I don't want to dwell on this, but please take a minute to cast your anonymous poll on how important you think migration is for resilience. There's no right or wrong answer here. This is just a chance for all of us to sort of gauge where are we at as a resilience community in thinking about the importance of migration. So I'm going to give everyone a few more seconds to make your voice heard through the Zoom poll. Okay. Shantice, are we able to see the results?
Yes. All right. So we are at 67% for 3.
Okay.
27% for 2, 5% for 1, and 1% for 0.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, everyone. That is, we see quite a range there, and it seems like increasingly from, we've got one person saying that it's not important. So I'm gonna have to have a conversation with you afterwards. But otherwise, people seeing some sort of value in migration as a source of resilience. Thank you, everyone. Okay, let's go on to poll number 2. Next slide, if we can. Perfect. Okay, so it seems like, we have a majority of people thinking migration is either very important or somewhat important for resilience, as a source of resilience. And so I'm curious, among this group, if you've addressed migration in your work. And I have a yes and no option here, but also a kind of option, because the reality is that some of us probably work with and around migration in some of our activities, even if there's not sort of an explicit migration focus. So again, no right or wrong answers here, just a chance to log in and let us know, again, as a community, sort of where are we at in addressing migration, in recognizing and catalyzing migration as a source of resilience. And just give a couple more seconds here. And I think that should be good. Shantice, what are we seeing as responses? Great. Okay, wonderful. So 55% coming in with a yes, that you've addressed migration in your work, 19 with no, and 25 with kind of. So now I am going to further put you on the spot. If you said yes or kind of, the other way I'd really love to use our platform today is to gather resources for the kinds of efforts that are going on. So if you have, program documents, blogs, any sort of resources that point to the kind of work you are doing on migration as a source of resilience, I would love to see it. And I think this community as a whole would really benefit from the kinds of resources all of us are either utilizing or producing in this area. So certainly if there's resources that you just like to point to as good practice, or if there's things that you've developed in your programming, please go ahead and share those in the chat. That would be excellent. We'll also be sending around a follow-up email in the next day or two for this event, and we'll be able to share a few of those resources out anyways. Okay, one more slide, please. So just as a final point from me, we think about migration as a source of resilience, but what we're really talking about is how does migration link up with the other things we know are important to people: livelihood diversification, risk management, skills and education, access to services, incomes and remittances. And what I am looking forward to thinking through with you all today is how do we get to a point where we're better able to link up our programming with supporting migration and these related sources of resilience, such that we are working towards safer and more productive migration in the places where we know people are already on the move. All right, next slide, please. So now I have the wonderful opportunity to introduce our two panelists for today, who are going to dive much deeper into these topics that we've touched on here in the introduction. First, we have Jian Kim, Director of Food Security and Research at Mercy Corps. So Jian will kick us off and then turn it over to Jessica Wolf, Program Director at Stanford University's Immigration Policy Lab. Thank you, Jian. Thank you, Jessica. I'm thrilled to have you with us today and really looking forward to the presentations. Over to you, Jian.
Thanks very much, Lori, and much pleasure in joining you all today with a discussion of a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. So to set the context and build on some of the comments that Lori made, I'm going to be drawing from a Mercy Corps report that we published a few years ago on the opportunities to harness the potential of labor migration for development and resilience. And the ways in which current approaches and the ways of working and thinking might be challenging our collective capacity to tap into this potential. I'm going to be keeping my remarks pretty brief, but my hope is to try to convince you of 3 points. First is migration is a reality. It's a common and enduring livelihood strategy and brings about both benefits and challenges to the households as well as the migrants. And on average, projections showcase that demographic shifts, the effects of climate change, and adaptation strategies are likely to increase migration flows, especially within countries and regions. Second, the status quo approach to migration in key foreign assistance is often not conducive to supporting people on the move and members of their households who stay behind. And this often falls along gender lines. Our interviews and policy analyses and case studies showcase that migration, especially when it takes across borders, is instead often regarded as a failure of development or resilience investments. And there's this persistent bias towards in-place programming. And third and lastly, despite those challenges, there are some promising opportunities to push forward. The very fact that this webinar is taking place and that many of you have voted that you're working around or with migration issues in your programming and your areas of work showcase how far we've come in this conversation. And so I'll highlight some of these opportunities in my remarks, and hopefully we can dig in together more in the Q&A. So let's jump in. Next slide, please. Next one, thanks. So I wouldn't be a researcher without first defining our terms. So I want to make sure that we are on the same page about this conversation. So migration, as many of you know, can take a variety of forms, including forced displacement, human trafficking, and economic migration. And our conversation today is going to be focusing on economic migration, what's also referred to as labor mobility, and while there's no consensus on the definition, it's understood as the movement of persons from one state to another or within their own country or region of residence for purposes of employment. And labor mobility can take various forms. It can be temporary, seasonal, circular, or permanent. And as a percentage of global population, the rate of international migration has remained consistently around 3%. And a vast majority of international migration remains internal or intracontinental, as you can see within the figure here. And the scale of internal migration, that is migration and mobility that's happening within borders and within regions, are known to be much more vast, but unfortunately we don't have the luxury of data to allow us to visualize it as nicely as the graphic you see on the slide here. And for example, just to give you some sense of the scale, at least 80% of the migrants in sub-Saharan Africa are believed to remain within the continent in their labor migration pursuits. There are some key trends that are likely to increase migration in the near future. So chief among these are the loss of agricultural and pastoral livelihoods as a result of depletion of natural resources, compounded by the effects of slow onset climate change. And though the projections vary, the International Organization for Migration predicts that environmental factors will push up to 200 million people to migrate by 2050. So, and in addition to climate change, rapid population growth and urbanizations are other indicators of an increasingly mobile population in parts of the world. These trends are forcing us to really contend with migration as an increasingly political area of discussion and programming, and certainly will push us to think about how we consider and program around migration and our resilience investments, especially in the countries of origins and in destination countries. Next slide, please. Given our limited time, I'm not going to dig into the evidence base, but at national and household level, the evidence showcase the critical importance that migration and remittances can play in the development and resilience of our households. Especially when migration is productive and proactive, it can contribute positively to household socioeconomic outcomes, bolster their ability to weather shocks and stresses. Remittances in particular play a really critical role in households' ability to pivot, cope, and adapt in face of idiosyncratic and covariate shocks. And what's really important to make sure that we do not overlook is, as visualized in the graphic on the slide here, is migration is an experience that brings forward really important benefits, but equally brings about risks and potential harms that programs should consider more intentionally and work to mitigate. What we have found in our analysis is that key foreign assistance often fail to recognize the potential of economic migration. And as part of our brief, we analyzed requests for applications, national strategies, donor strategy documents, and which overwhelmingly showcase for us a bias towards in-place strategies in programming. When migration was considered in the few documents or in few strategies, donors were thinking about programs to respond to migration in order to manage it, to contain it, or to prevent labor mobility. And taking that to an extreme, migration was regarded at times as a threat and a failure of development and resilience investments. And an example that I will draw upon is following from the 2015 migration crisis in Europe, during which, as many of you may know, 1 million migrants and refugees arrived on the shores of Greece and Italy, and European leaders proposed to address the root causes of irregular migration by pledging close to 5 billion euros in economic development projects, focusing on those key sending countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And while the program is believed to have created tens of thousands of jobs and improved basic services, which are really important and positive outcomes in their own right, this approach to preventing economic migration rested on an assumption that in the short term, modest development improvements in Africa, coupled with improved security and border management, would lead to fewer migrants in Europe. And what's important to note here is that the literature on migration and development challenges this assumption. Economic improvements are typically associated with actually increases in migration in lower and middle income countries until gross domestic product per capita hit a particular point. And it's principally because households are investing their disposable income back into the migration experience. Next slide, please. So why does this bias persist? Why do aid programs focus on in-place development and resilience building and invest in solutions that focus on improving local context and conditions? And I think there's 3 key points to highlight here. First, economic migration remains politically sensitive in many donor countries. Domestic political pressures to curb immigration drive foreign policy and assistance directed at migrant sending countries. And while anti-immigration sentiments are not necessarily the predominant view, they are still prevalent, especially in Europe and United States, and do actively shape foreign assistance decisions, even in countries where migration tends to be regional or internal. Second, development practitioners and resilience practitioners institutions work and operate with a flawed understanding of migration. Our analyses and interviews with key informants showcase that despite a large body of scholarships that connect migration and resilience, in practice, there's very little overlap between the two spheres. And consequently, the primary focus of policies and programs vis-a-vis migration is to prevent it by improving local economic conditions. And this is the case, even though research and experience indicate that this approach is unlikely to be effective. And the disconnect between the two policy areas is further reflected in the institutional structures that implement these policies that tend to also work in silos, though I think Lori might be able to share a positive move in this space, at least for USAID. And the absence of an overarching coordination mechanisms that connect migration and resilience policies across donor government agencies are presenting a serious challenge, though we're seeing some positive shifts there. Lastly, there are two key features of resilience programs and strategies that I wanted to highlight, which may not be conducive to supporting people on the move. First is that large majority of aid programs are geographically targeted. So program success is measured against impact at a defined locality, often at a country or subnational level, like a village, which do not align with the reality that people are typically on the move from one place to another. And rarely do programs focus on ecosystems in which individuals are migrating from one place to another, across borders, but also within. And as success of aid program is measured against an impact at a defined locality, institutional incentives, such as meeting expected outcomes at the country or subnational level, do not currently support programs to support people who are moving from one place to another. And then, it's also not a small challenge that current monitoring systems will be challenged by the task of tracking mobile program participants. And relatedly, supporting people on the move is often seen as a risky and complex endeavor, especially those who are moving across international borders. And there are diverse legal frameworks that come into play that require responsible resilience actors to ensure that participants have proper documentations, permissions, and support to move abroad. And even when we're focusing only on regular or legal migration, there might be fear that they have limited oversight as to where and how people are migrating. Let's move to the next slide so that I am creating some ways forward for people's consideration. So in many ways, against this backdrop of political sensitivities and status quo ways of investing in programming, what's really clear is that solutions need to be both technical, but perhaps more importantly, political in nature. So in turn, the how and the why. So first is spreading the message and instituting the reality that migration is a reality. It is a reality for many households around the world whom we aim to serve through our programs and investments, and it is an experience that brings both benefits and risks that stand to be better proactively managed. And then certainly it is not the donors or aid actors' place to dictate whether households choose to migrate or where they seek economic opportunities. But as migration trends are expected to increase, there's an opportunity for resilience investments and programs to focus on better supporting legal, safe, and more productive migration opportunities. Second, it's about integrating economic migration as a key component of development strategies and investments, and moving away from investments that consider migration as a hindrance to resilience building or development, or a phenomenon that's meant to be curbed, contained, or prevented. And then lastly, it's about piloting, testing, and scaling programs to support people on the move and those who stay behind. Even when there is interest and political will to support productive migration, there's a limited understanding of how this can be done and how interventions can be designed to overcome the associated risks and sensitivities that aid actors need to think about. And so in turn, it demands that we start small. So by beginning with programs that are viewed as pilots, we can test approaches that go beyond the traditional limits, including more regional approaches to development aid that connect people, programs across national borders. I'll highlight a few buckets here, and then I'm happy to dig into some opportunities. So first is working towards regional approaches to development. So a significant barrier to integrating migration into programming is its country or locality specific approach. So a more regional approach, like the one that I know that our fellow programs are instituting in Central America right now, that connect economic development programs across national borders, will be really helpful in facilitating opportunities to pilot, test, and scale programs to support people on the move and those who stay behind. Second is improving opportunities and conditions for migration. There's a graphic in the climate mitigation report that USAID put out, with Lori being one of the key authors, that lay out the different aspects of the migration journey. And I think that graphic does a really good job, along with the report, of outlining some of these opportunities. But first, providing information for safer legal routes for migration, providing tailored skills for training for migration to ensure that they have more productive opportunities, improving economic and social outcomes for migrants and their families, such as facilitating remittance transfers, supporting those who remain behind, who tend to be elderly, those who are physically differently abled, or women, and then also to decouple local development and migration deterrence as strategies. And lastly, thinking about the ways in which we can invest more in programs to support migration once they reach their destinations. So increasing services for migration, such as housing, financial services, or healthcare, or something as simple as lining up and making sure that people know where to get identification cards. Creating linkages between private sector actors and migrants is another example. I think I probably have gone over time, so I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to dig into some of the details more during the Q&A. And I think I will be turning it over to Jessica Wolf from IPA to talk to us about her work. Thanks.
Thank you, Gian, and thanks to the ResilienceLinks community for bringing us all together today, and to those of you who are able to join in on the call. By way of a very quick introduction, I work at the Immigration Policy Lab, which is an applied research lab at Stanford University. We partner with organizations ranging from government agencies to international NGOs to service organizations to co-design and evaluate policies and programs in context of migration and displacement. The goal here is to generate research and evidence on what works and how we might improve our programming in spaces of resilience, livelihoods, economic development in order to support people on the move, their families, and their host communities. Can we go to the next slide? So to complement some of the frameworks that Gian just presented for us, here's another way to think about migration as resilience. And this is pulling from a paper called Migration as Adaptation. There's a continuum of experiences that individuals can have along the range of adaptive migration, that is planned, proactive, offers individuals the opportunity to realize high levels of agency in choice and opportunity. There are proactive migration experiences that are perhaps constrained by insufficient information, insufficient resources, and may lead to maladaptive migration. And then we can often see reactive experiences, which this author labels as survival migration. So this is more of an urgent situation, short timelines, and perhaps operating in context of limited information. And so for us, we want to learn about how can we produce opportunities at the higher end of this range? So what we're calling in this paper, adaptive migration. And what opportunities do we all have as practitioners to support individuals to realize that level of agency and opportunity? Can we go to the next slide? I'd like to share a case study that we have been working on along with Mercy Corps for many years now. A project that we're calling Planning for Productive Migration. It takes place in Niger with clients and participants who are moving throughout West Africa. And so the context where we are operating for this program is a setting where climate is increasingly rendering agricultural livelihoods less and less efficient for families in agrarian societies. In Niger, 80% of the population is dependent on agriculture as their livelihood. Families often have 7 to 8 children, and the rainy season is increasingly unpredictable. In fact, this year, it was substantially shorter than predicted. In the same setting, Niger is in the West African Community of States, ECOWAS or CEDEAO in French. And in this framework in this regional framework, there is an opportunity to realize migration between countries in that union, which is often referenced as the zone of free movement. And so for citizens of these countries, there's an opportunity to travel visa-free to live and work up to 90 days. And so we sought to understand what opportunities do we have to leverage this policy environment and present additional opportunities for aspiring individuals who seek additional economic opportunity and seek to migrate, but have faced various constraints in doing so. We do see patterns and histories of seasonal and regional migration in Niger and the surrounding region, and yet surveys around aspirations for migration show us there's a really large realization gap, where we have high rates of individuals who want to migrate from a representative survey in our study region, where upwards of 60 to 70% of young men would be interested in migrating to find work. And yet we see rates that are much lower in the 25 to 30% range. So let me explain a little bit about what our program was and how we have tested this and are scaling it right now. Can we go to the next slide? We started with a series of community-based learnings. We worked with focus groups, aspiring migrants, successful migrants, community organizations throughout parts of Niger, as well as the broader West Africa region. And a few things that follow exactly what Gian just presented to us that we found in this setting. First of all, migration is seen and used as a household strategy for livelihoods and resilience. In families that have many children, they will often support and invest in one child to seek economic opportunity somewhere else to diversify the household income opportunities. This then helps them increase household consumption for their families and manage risk to potential shocks. Some of the main barriers that we heard about, which helped us understand what that realization gap was, are the high cost of travel and limited capital to realize that, networks and the aspiration for additional information of where and how to go, who to connect with when you arrive somewhere, documentation, as identity cards and vaccination documents are required for regional migration in this space, and specific employment skills, and finally, the knowledge of the risks or opportunities in different destinations. If there's not someone in your close immediate network who's realized this opportunity, how might one learn about how to leverage migration as a resilience or livelihood strategy? At the same time, one of the things we learned during this first phase of research is that the benefits of migration do not always return back to the household. An individual may set out to seek economic opportunity for themselves, move away, and not stay in touch with the family and not send remittances back home. And so we wanted to think about what opportunity would we have to design a program that would facilitate safe, legal, and productive migration that would improve livelihoods and increase resilience for the entire household. So I'd love to share with you what we've designed and what we've been testing on the next slide. I'll talk through this briefly, but we've developed what is called the Planning for Productive Migration program. And it's a migration preparation program for young men who have expressed an interest in migration. In our program, we actually include both a young man and another member of their household. And so this is an opportunity to potentially increase communication, household investment, and household involvement in the migration decision. The training includes pieces such as a 7 or 8 day training curriculum that teaches about the legal requirements, some risks and opportunities, how to leverage networks both before traveling and afterwards. There are 2 household dialogues that are facilitated where the household sets out to make a migration plan. First of all, do you want to migrate? Yes or no? And then decisions about when and where and how will you stay in touch with your household. The program offered support to participants to obtain their national ID or a vaccination if that was necessary, again, as that's required for legal migration in this region. And finally, if an individual completed all of those parts, they were eligible for a round-trip bus ticket to a destination of their choice within ECOWAS. We tested this program a couple of years ago with a pilot group of 200 households. And in the post-training period, we also offer ongoing risk mitigation and surveying, as this is a research project. And this includes opportunities for always a return ticket home, a hotline for the program if connections to local services or emergency support was needed, and an external advisory committee of regional experts and practitioners to help us assess the challenges or the opportunities that may arise from this program. So we piloted this several years ago. We saw, with support actually from the USAID Development Innovation Ventures, and we saw opportunity and positive inclinations. Again, participants in this program fully retain agency to determine if they want to leverage that bus ticket. And so we hope to really scale up this program so that we would be in a position to evaluate it and contribute evidence to the learning base. So if you go to this next slide, I'll wrap up and share that we're in the middle of a larger scale program. We have 3,000 households who are involved right now in the Tawa region of Niger. They've been randomized into 3 different program options. And so we're in a position now with this research framework to really learn about the impacts of the Planning for Productive Migration program. We'll be able to assess that against the benefits of an unconditional cash transfer. And as I've laid out here on the slides, we have ongoing surveys and research with both the primary young man involved and their household, so that we can learn about the impact of this program on a range of outcomes that will affect features of resilience and psychosocial well-being. So I'm going to leave it there. We'll be happy to talk more about this in the Q&A, and I will pass it back to Laurie.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thanks, Gian. Those were excellent presentations. I'm going to invite Gian to come off camera, and also another colleague of ours from Mercy Corps, Alma, who's a senior researcher on climate adaptation, migration, and displacement, to join us for the panel and Q&A. All right, so everybody, please feel free to populate the Q&A. I see questions coming in. I'm going to kick us off with a couple questions, and then we will be coming to all of your questions in the chat as well. Gian and Alma, I want to start with you, and you did a great job, Gian, in your presentation, starting to talk about what are sort of the areas of intervention, and you talked about regional approaches, improving opportunities and conditions for migration, improving the economic and social outcomes for migrants and their families, and then investing in programming in migrant destinations. I was wondering if you could dive in a little bit to give us a few examples of how some of those, how interventions in those areas might be playing out. Let me turn it over to you, Gian and Alma.
I will turn it over to Alma. I think she'll be really well placed to answer this one. Alma, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, at Mercy Corps, we've been working on different projects that really involved just different forms of resilience and different actors. So right now, we're in the middle of a program in Central America that actually Gian mentioned a little bit about that during her presentation, in which we're searching. We're working along with IPL and a remittances company, and we're trying to investigate how remittances can be a source of resilience for those who stay. So basically, we have, whenever there is a hurricane coming to a region in Central America during the hurricane season, we're able to identify before it arrives, if it's coming to a specific country, then we can launch a trigger that will allow for the remittances company to send messages to those who have already migrated, and to see if they're willing to send more remittances to their country of origin. So that way families can prepare for a storm before it arrives. So we are really looking at how when migration already happened, how remittances can be a source of resilience. And in addition to that, at Mercy Corps, like our country offices have also been working on that. So for instance, in Colombia, there is a set of different programs that have been allowing for just refugees coming, especially from Venezuela, to integrate into the labor market. And that just basically considering both the local population and migrants and refugees to fully integrate and to allow them to really cooperate and really just using migration as this form of resilience.
Thanks so much, Alma. And I want to turn to Jessica. And Jessica, thank you for that, like, really interesting and innovative case study in Niger of the planning for productive migration work. Jessica knows that I'm a huge fan of this work and how it continues to play out. So recognizing that Niger is a pretty unique context, but seasonal migration as a livelihood strategy is really common throughout the world. I'm wondering if you could just say a bit about how perhaps these approaches and opportunities might play out in other contexts, or how do you see sort of the framework of the planning for productive migration work outside of Niger?
Thanks, Lori. I see opportunities to apply this model in a couple of different settings. And again, from that first diagram I shared, the concept is to see if we can move more towards the top of that framework in settings where individuals are able to proactively consider, think about, and maximize their agency in considering migration as a resilience option. Other settings in which seasonal migration already is being used as a resilience strategy, but may present an opportunity to leverage even more, are in, there are a few other policy environments where there are opportunities for regional migration for citizens of those countries. And so where there's the legal foundation to do that, I think there's opportunities to learn if this approach would be successful and transfer to other regions and other employment settings as well. Another setting that I like to talk about is, as we heard previously, a majority of migration is internal migration. And so for communities that are at risk of climate impacts, internal migration with preparation presents a really fantastic opportunity to consider that as a resilience strategy, either for an individual or at a larger household level. The last thing I would mention here is we are focusing today on economic migration, and I want to mostly keep our attention there. But there are settings in which individuals who have been forcibly displaced and received permanent status to stay in other countries could consider planning moves to other parts of the country as the durable solution where there may be additional demand for additional opportunities for employment and services. We often see displacement concentrated in certain areas. And so considering context of long-term displacement and individuals who have the legal standing to stay in a place for a given time, thinking about planning and searching out opportunities for long-term integration through migration in another city, region where they've arrived, I think is another opportunity.
Excellent. Thanks, Jessica. And thanks to everyone who's putting questions into the Q&A. We're going to turn to a few of those questions now. And I'm going to start off, Jessica, I might come back to you with this question, and then Gian and Alma, please feel free to chime in. Economic migration has been described, this is a question from the Q&A. Economic migration has been described across the slides as a resilience strategy and a household livelihood strategy. In your view, should it be considered and possibly measured as a livelihood coping strategy? And I think some of your work, Jessica, sort of answers that question a bit in practice, but I want to give you a chance to respond. And then Gianna and Alma, if you would like to respond as well, you're welcome to, or we can move on to other questions.
Yeah, thanks so much. To me, these are kind of two sides of the same coin, right? And I think we can be proactive in thinking about specifically the measurement piece. I actually really appreciate that part of the question, where we can hypothesize about how outcomes of certain economic migration experiences may lend themselves to benefit the individual or their family. And we can measure if or when those are used to mitigate shocks. And so with my researcher hat on, we are in a position, though it takes a lot of investment and long-term projects, because we need to be in touch over a period of time, as we continue to establish migration as a feature and as a consideration for measurement in development spheres, we'll be able to learn about, do rates of migration increase in times of agricultural stress or in times of economic downfall, or we'll have, basically to summarize, with a long-term lens, I think we can leverage our research to answer this question about how much is it used as a proactive resilience strategy and livelihoods opportunity, or how much is it an opportunity that individuals take in reaction to a particular or slow onset negative shock.
Thanks, Jessica. That's excellent. Gianna, I'm going to pose another question to you, and then if you want to come in on this one, you can do that as well. We're getting a few different questions coming in, essentially around how do we think about migration along a spectrum of forced displacement to more proactive voluntary movement, and how do we think about the role of climate related displacement, as well as somebody was just noting the distinctions between, economic migration happening in contexts where there's conflict as well. So recognizing that there are a whole range of push in terms of migration drivers and pulls in terms of opportunities and destination factors. Gian, can you help us think a little bit about migrants that are falling along that spectrum? And I don't know, I mean, it's a tough question, right? Because there's people that are moving for all kinds of reasons and for all kinds of opportunities, but perhaps how you see that as how can we best support resilience across that spectrum? And with our focus on economic migration, how does that link up with people who might be on the move related to conflict or climate? Thanks.
It's an easy one. I think Jessica's, graphic on the first slide to kick off our conversation kind of summarizes some of the nuances of that consideration of the different aspects of spectrum well. So, just to put a finer point on that, I think where migration or mobility is a reality, meeting people where they are, and I don't mean that literally, it just mean in terms of like how they are shaping up and how they're thinking about those decisions to make sure that we are creating conditions that are favorable for people to have migration experiences that are proactive, well-informed, safe and legal to the extent that's possible, and making sure that we're creating the pre-context and the foundations for that is where the opportunities lie. Where migration is a reality and it's something that has to happen, and if we're unable to help create those or facilitate those conditions, what are the ways in which we can show up to make sure that we are supporting that experience to the extent that we can? So maybe it is providing vouchers for people once who have to go somewhere, and making sure that they have enough resources at play to find a safe place to stay, equipping people with support to get identification cards to make sure that they are instituted and well in place to make sure that they are surviving the best way and coping the best way they can once they reach their destination. And if there's family separation that's happening, forcibly, what can we do to support those who stay behind? As I mentioned before, The family separation tends to be highly gendered, and it's often women who stay behind. It's men with who are much older. It's people who are older or with physical impediments that do not allow them to engage within the labor market. And so what are opportunities for us to think about ways in which we can support them if the migration experience and decision to do so is not something that we can facilitate? So I guess to summarize all of that, it's identifying and understanding the context and the drivers and the push factors and the pull factors for migration, and then understanding the ways in which aid actors can show up, recognizing the context, and whether the drivers are conflict related or climate related. Of course, they'll demand different leverages and entry points. But I think the takeaway point there is what can we do to support informed, proactive migration decisions? And if that's not possible, how can we show up to make sure that we're supporting a safer and more productive migration experience for all of those involved?
Gian, that's super well said. Thank you. Jessica or Alma, do you want to jump in on this at all? Okay, I'm gonna pose yet another question, and then feel free to, whenever I come back to you, feel free to respond to earlier questions as well. Gian, I'm actually gonna stick with you. Somebody put in the chat just wanting to dig a little deeper into the reasons why practitioners might be operating with a flawed understanding of migration. And I know your research and paper really dug into that, and I thought you might be able to say a bit more about sort of the reasons behind some flawed understanding, interpretation of the role of migration and development.
So I will answer with the caveat that I think some of this is speculation, some of it is rooted in the key informant interviews and the policy analysis that we did, but I don't have the full picture. But with that caveat in mind, I think it might be important to expand that framing, and I apologize if this was the way that I presented it, but that misunderstanding or misframing of migration as being failure development is not something that just specific to practitioners, but instead, is something that we picked up even more in like the policymakers, those who are making decisions about where investments go. And I think a lot of it has to do with the politics, the political sensitivity. And despite, I think, our efforts here today, and I think with researchers as well, trying to shed light on the reality that much of migration is regional, internal. What dominates our attention, especially as we enter the election cycles here and across the pond, is thinking about migration as something that is dangerous, something to be curbed, and something to be that's something that happens across borders. And I think, and in turn, there's an understanding or I guess false assumption that if we work to think about creating context within these areas where migrants are coming from, we're going to be stemming migration. And I think some of the papers that I alluded to showcase that maybe that's an unfounded assumption. So I think a lot of it is very politically rooted. And I think, from an institutional and the operational perspective, the ways in which programs think about design, measure the success of their programs, which are then, what donors hold us to, encourage that thinking or may promote that thinking of, migration is an obstacle that we must get around, since the success of a program is really rooted in how well in-place development and in-place investments are thriving. And so I think, which in turn, whether it's implicit or explicit, the messaging is migration is something to be dealt with, something to be ignored, or something to be curbed. And then if migration is happening within the context, if development is happening in the context of migration, is something that will naturally fall away. So I think a lot of it has to be, many of it is political in nature, the reasons, and I think it's also maybe some branding exercise that could be done of just reframing and making sure that we're really representing the evidence base that showcases that there's a bit of a chasm in the evidence base and the ways in which internationally policies and agreements are thinking about migration, the role of migration in support of development and resilience, and the ways in which we are programming and investing around it. So I think it's just bringing those two crowds together and making sure we are having that dialogue that might be a bit political and challenging to have.
Gian, thanks so much. Yeah, it reminds me of a conversation I had recently with one of the authors of the World Development Report from last year from the World Bank, which was entitled Migrants, Refugees, and Societies. But he was really making the point that as development practitioners, we're often focused on development in place, and perhaps a more appropriate focus, or a focus we need to balance, is simply human capital that can be with people no matter where they are. Excellent. Okay. Jessica, I'm going to turn back to you for this question. Somebody was asking about the role of integration and migrant integration. And I think Gian, in your presentation, you laid out really well, like opportunities for interventions sort of across these areas. Jessica, you gave us a deep dive on a really incredible way to operationalize working with people ahead of migration for planning on migration. But of course, we know that integration in areas of destination is really critical. Jessica, I'm wondering if you can highlight a few of the opportunities you're familiar with, and don't feel free to feel like you need to do a comprehensive look at this. The world of integration is very large, but areas where you see some interesting efforts around integration in migrant destinations and what that looks like. Thanks.
Thanks for raising up that question, Laurie. I often think of a migration experience in kind of 4 periods. There's mobility, or the decision to make a move. There's the journey. There's what I often call integration, or the arrival experience. And then for some, there's a choice to return home or move on further. And so I actually think, to answer the question around integration, you need to consider the first 2 phases of that as well. And so there are opportunities to provide information and lower a lot of barriers to understanding what could make for a safe, legal, and productive migration opportunity for individuals who are interested in realizing that opportunity. So that's at the first phase. There's a lot that can be done along the experience of a journey, and there are organizations who are supporting that in more ways than I could count in the next hour. But opportunities to safeguard migrants along their journey, to support basic needs as they progress along an intended travel route. And so supporting a safer, secure, planned journey also supports the integration experience. And then upon arrival in a destination, there are, first of all, I can't underestimate the importance of an individual's agency and network in that integration experience. So often there are connections from home, there are connections from friends and family, and that primarily is where most people find their first house, find their first job, seek out their first opportunity. And so the personal connection is often leveraged, and our organizations and the development community can do our best to support that and not get in the way of it either. And so models that I have seen and I really like around this, there are some local governments who have set up reception centers at major bus transit points or train transit points, and it's kind of a one-stop shop. And so it says, do you need healthcare? Do you need basic necessities for your first couple of days in town? Do you want to access employment services? And I think proactively providing that information and being explicit about what services are available to someone who's arriving in a new place is a really good trend that we're seeing throughout the world, frankly, and one that I'm excited to follow coming into the future.
Laurie, if I may jump
Please.
in. Yes, I think that first, just informal networks are basically the most important form, right? So that's kind of usually people migrate to places where they know other people, and that's extremely important. But also, I think there are examples of extraordinary efforts that have been implemented by local governments, by development organizations, by local NGOs, that are extremely important, working with employers, for instance, to facilitate the integration of migrants. I think that's critical for allowing them to find better opportunities and to really just match them with opportunities that are more fitted with their skills. Also, just allowing them to obtain one's form of identification, right, as a residence permit or any sort of ID. That's also extremely important, and that facilitates their integration, and also just having access to just to healthcare services or education for children. So I think that's extremely relevant as well.
Yeah, thanks, Alma. Agreed. You know, I heard somebody talking recently just about how in a US context, what robust infrastructure we have for refugee integration. So if you arrive in the US with refugee status, you qualify for access to a wide range of services and support that's provided both through the government and through a number of local organizations. And what would it look like if we treated migrant arrivals in a similar way, so that migrants had access to the range of services that allows them to have that safe and productive migration that benefits both the areas where they're landing, the destinations, but also through remittances and knowledge exchange, the areas where they're coming from. So I think this integration piece is really important, and there's a lot of good models for how it works. Not that it's easy. There's a lot of good models out there that we can build on. So thank you. Okay, I need to jump back to our audience questions here. There is a question on measurement, and I'm not sure who feels best placed to answer this one. Jessica, I know you do a lot of good work on measurement, but others, please feel free to chime in as well. I think people are wondering about measuring measuring the impact of migration on resilience sort of outside of a dedicated program. And we know a lot of the work that we end up doing that touches on migration is more migrant inclusive approaches, maybe not so much a dedicated program like the Planning for Productive Migration program is. So Jessica, maybe I'll start with you and then others please jump in, but do you have thoughts on measuring the impact of migration on resilience, maybe outside of the context of a dedicated program? And that might be, I don't know if that's a hard question or not, and we can always follow up offline with, I think I might know who posed this one.
It's certainly not an easy question, but let me give a couple of starting thoughts, and I'm very curious to hear also what Alma and Gian think. One opportunity that's maybe taking this from the end to start is leveraging remittances data. There is a huge wealth of research on the role of remittances on individual and household resilience measures, economic development, food security, education outcomes for children. And we can learn from remittances money, that's coming from individuals and entire communities who have moved abroad and send that back home. There's a lot of good research also on the impact that can have at kind of national GDP levels for many countries. So that's a kind of macroeconomic orientation towards the question that I just got. Another larger scale response I would have is supporting stronger measurement for national governments, that they do include migrant populations in their own measurement and survey efforts. So often these really well-funded and kind of extensive programs are available only to citizens of a certain country. And so that's a missed opportunity for the government itself to learn about the economic contributions and well-being situation of migrants in their country, as well as giving us a broader opportunity to learn about that outside of a specific program that might be supporting a migration experience. So those would be my two first thoughts, but I want to keep thinking about it, so I'll pass it on to the others.
I think Jessica, your first two stops are where my head went, is monitoring, making sure that we're thinking about how best to account for the migration experience, namely through remittances. So I would say that's the first hunch. And I also think, thinking beyond the financial aspects of migration and in thinking about the social elements, the family separation, the ways in which the psychosocial aspects of migration that often tend to get overlooked. And so making sure that we're folding those considerations in. And I think, surveys can only go so far. And I would as a qualitative researcher or somebody with qualitative research, I have to say, qualitative research and trying to unpack the experience and the ways in which it is affecting not only households' ability to cope and adapt and mitigate shocks, but the ways in which that it is influencing their decisions to pursue other opportunities, or thinking about this sense of aspiration or hope, which we have also seen as being really incredibly important in thinking about resilience building and context, seem like another opportunity. But we'll continue thinking about that. Whoever posed that question, thanks very much.
Thanks, Gian. Thanks, Jessica. Alma, I would like to turn to you. There's a question about how have the findings from Gian's paper, Jessica's research, and I would just broaden it out to say migration research more broadly. How are we seeing those sort of operationalized in specific programs or in conversation with governments and political entities around policy considerations? And this is a pretty big question, but I think you might have some insights into just how is the conversation evolving between what we're learning about the contributions of migration to development and how that's being translated into practice and policy.
Oh my, that's a hard one, right? And it depends pretty much on the context. I think that we've seen that more and more policymakers and advocacy groups have just recognized the importance of migration, which I think it's a first step towards that. Just recognizing that it happens and that something just needs to be just done about it. And I think that hopefully, probably I'm here being too naive, but because of course there's then we see the political aspects of that, but we also see the need of that, right? So in Europe, for instance, there's a change in the demographics of the population. So of course, there is a need for young labor, and that must come from somewhere. And of course, technology will facilitate some of that. I think that when we think about migration, it's just such a dense word because it comprehends so many aspects of it. And basically, there might be many different ways in which it can be implemented. Also, again, just going back to what Gian mentioned at the beginning, most of the migration happens within countries and within regions. So also regional efforts are extremely relevant, working together. The program in Niger really shows that it's a great example of how just promoting one way in which these productive and safe migration can lead to important efforts. And I very much hope that the findings of that program will lead to policymakers and others just to think about different possibilities. So I'm an optimistic, but I also realize that many times the political context just prevents for those some of those things from happening. So yeah.
Thank you, Alma. And unfortunately, we only have really a couple minutes left for our Q&A. It always goes quicker than we thought. I think what I'd like to do, we do have some remaining questions, but I'd like to just give Jessica 1 minute and then Gian 1 minute to just kind of wrap up your thinking or any kind of threads that we've left hanging. Yeah, Jessica, over to you.
I think the last thing I would highlight here is that there is an opportunity to use research, and super valid point on supplementing quantitative and qualitative research together to get a comprehensive understanding of the different forms migration can take, the different types of benefits it can render to individuals, to their families, and to the communities where they are moving to. And it's the opportunity to engage research, storytelling, to share this with a range of donor communities, implementing agencies, as well as communities themselves that are receiving migrants. So I just like to leverage the balance of bringing evidence to the fore so that we can demonstrate the contributions and the opportunity that migration can present, and also leveraging that to help change some of the narrative.
Thanks, Jessica. That was one of the points I was gonna make, so it saves me a minute. In addition to that, I would say for me, I'm walking away with a sense of optimism and seeing that there's this window for this dialogue to happen. When I first started thinking about, this unharnessed potential of labor migration for development and resilience writ large, that was about 2016 or so, and those conversations were not happening. And the very fact that we're having this webinar where we're centering migration as a source of resilience, and there are people who are seriously and intentionally thinking about ways to program around that. And for me, that signals a huge shift in where we are and where we have been. I guess related to that, for me, another takeaway and one thing to really think about as we forge ahead is needing for solutions to be not only technical in nature, but also very political and politically savvy. And what I mean is making sure that as much as research is critically important, and I would love to believe that research and evidence solves all, but we also know that we need to make sure that we are framing and thinking about the opportunity and the challenges ahead in ways that align with policy mandates, policy restrictions, and the windows that that people are contending with who are making these investment and programming decisions. And so I'll just drop a shout out to Center for Global Development. Helen Dempster and Beza Tesfaye did a really brilliant paper about thinking about ways in which they can frame migration in a way that resonates with policy actors. And so I think just making sure that in this effort, in this collective call to do more in this space, we're thinking about both the technical and the political approaches. I think those things need to go hand in hand for us to make, to forge ahead and to carve out concrete opportunities. Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks so much to all of our panelists. You are brilliant. This is really exciting work. And I know we weren't able to get to all of the questions today, so I'm going to volunteer our fabulous panelists. They are available. You can Google them and find them and send them an email. And I know they'll be really interested to hear your thoughts. I am equally interested to hear your thoughts. For anybody who said they were doing work on migration, I would love to have a one-on-one. I want to hear more about the kind of work that's going on and what you're thinking. In response to the question about shifts in sort of approaches given the research and findings that are coming out about migration and development, I did want to highlight a few things at USAID. I think this is a really exciting time at USAID, and we are seeing definitely a shift towards embracing the role of migration in development, how migration can help us achieve the sustainable development goals, and thinking through how do we make our programming migrant inclusive across our programming, and what are specific opportunities that we may not be taking advantage of right now where we can do more. And I'm just going to point to a few efforts, and I know I'm going to miss some, but USAID's climate strategy that came out almost 2 years ago really highlights mobility, both the need to support climate-related displacement, but also to recognize mobility as an adaptation strategy and the need to support people on the move to make that mobility safer and more productive. We have a USAID agency learning agenda with about 6 different items that we're pursuing as an agency for learning, and migration is one of those items that we're pursuing as an agency to learn more about. We have a migration working group at USAID, and that working group continues to meet, bring together the work from around the agency, and move forward our thinking and approaches on migration and development. A couple weeks ago, for the first time in 8 years, the US government sent a delegation, including 2 of us from USAID, to the Global Forum on Migration and Development, the summit held in Geneva a couple weeks ago, which was an excellent opportunity for the US to continue to liaise with other nations and also civil society around opportunities in migration and development. So that was just another avenue to get us going in the conversation, and really seeing how this work is important and how it can play out on the ground. And then finally highlighting that USAID is just about to launch in the next couple of months a migration task team with a mandate for better institutionalizing, thinking through, visioning, institutionalizing this work on migration and development at USAID. So I would say it's an exciting time at USAID. And I see that it's time to close. So very, very quickly, please check out resources in the ResilienceLinks newsletter that we sent out this month, and we'll send you a few more resources in the next day or two. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our speakers. You're brilliant. To continue to explore the things we've talked about today, please visit ResilienceLinks.org, and you can also follow them on LinkedIn and Twitter. And lastly, when this webinar closes, you will be prompted to complete a post-webinar survey, and please take a few minutes to share your opinions. That would be super helpful for all of us. Again, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us. Have a great day.